I'm Amy Jordan, and this is Yes, But Why podcast. Yeah.
When I was probably about 12 or 13, I decided I was going to be the youngest writer, ever. Because I read books. I was like, well, I love books. How hard could it be to write one?
How hard could it be?
So I started writing this science fiction story, which I still remember the idea for it, and I still might actually do something with it one day.
You don't have to tell us the story if you want to sell it. I totally understand.
Yeah. No, well, it's kind of it's not even that original, but there might be something there. It was this kind of goofy story about a kid who could kind of body swap, but he did it through like a technological way. He could like download his his consciousness into other people, but there had to be some kind of like electronic interface. I feel like
reality.
Yeah, right. I feel like I was inspired by this book by Daniel Sobol, who had primarily done the Encyclopedia Brown books, but he wrote this one book called like The Powers of Asher Fine, and it was about like body hopping. So even then, I was just completely like kind of riffing off of this book that I loved that not many people seem to know about.
Is that like the first one that did it? Because they have all sorts of. There's like a ton of movies. I could name. I don't know that I could actually name the actual titles, but I could tell you the parent-child duos that I've seen do. The body swapping maybe a million times. Yeah. That's a common theme.
Yeah, they were really popular. I think in the 80s. They had. I think like Judd Nelson was in one one of them.
It's like Judge Reinhold and Fred Savage.
Fred Savage,
Kirk Cameron, and the guy who played Arthur. Oh God, what's his name?
Yeah, I blanked out on his name too.
Oh my God, that hurts me that I don't remember that name. It's okay.
It does.
So the book that you mentioned,
like a lot of the cartoons,
is that the main one? Is that the like story that it started with?
I mean that's probably maybe the first time I encountered it in a book. I would think. You mean in terms of like my writing, or?
No, I meant like I wondered if you knew if this particular story that you had was maybe the origin of the essence of this kind of story. But now that I'm saying it out loud, I'm realizing that this is probably like the oldest story ever. Swapping bodies.
Right. I remember. Yeah. I feel like every cartoon I used to watch as a kid had the episode where characters swapped bodies. Like they did it on Thundercats, they did it on like Darkwing Duck, and a bunch of cartoons really. Like that. So
they even do it like today in like sitcoms. Like I can guarantee that like a current sitcom has done it recently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. I'm like trying to remember one, and I'm like feel confident that I've seen one. Yeah.
Well, when they start appearing in the next couple of years, maybe we'll have rekindled people's interest in them. Anyway, that story that I started writing, like I was 13, and I was only a good enough writer to realize that it was terrible, so I stopped. And I'm sure I still have pages somewhere that I wrote by hand, and then I didn't really do any real creative writing, except for assignments in school over the years. I never really thought of it as something that you could do as like a job, or a calling or anything like that.
So you decided not to do it because you decided that it was bad?
It was bad. I knew it was bad.
You knew,
it was very clear,
or
and
you just
I'm sure
thought?
that on some level I knew that it wasn't original.
Oh.
Yeah.
It makes me sad. It's sad
and
that's
I wish
part
I'd
of
stuck
it.
with it.
Well,
yeah. Well, the other thing was I've realized recently since I've been writing books, author visits weren't a thing when I was a kid. I don't think I met any authors until probably college or after college, like going to book signings and things like that. But authors did not come to my school and talk about their books and say, hey, kids, this is a thing you can do if you're interested in stories and if you're a good writer. Authors were always this sort of, at a remove. It was, we obviously read, the classics. Lord of the Flies and, Romeo and Juliet and things like that in school. And those were often like dead authors, and the authors we were supposed to kind of interpret like what they meant, in their stories. It wasn't necessarily, we weren't taught that they were just people who, made a living or sometimes didn't make a living at telling stories,
Yeah. Yeah, I remember, you're right that like when they teach the old books, they like put all this political overtone in it. But if you were like to talk to you about something you're writing, it's like, well, I mean, I wasn't really thinking about the current political climate. I was just writing this. Like, I had an idea for a story and then I wrote it, as opposed to like, you're right, like in every English class we've all taken where they're like, during this time, so-and-so was very involved with something important. And so that must have connected to what he was writing. I was like, no, he was a multifaceted
or like, let's
human.
analyze the symbolism in the story.
Yeah.
When he, thinking of specifically like the Cask of Amontillado, like stabbing the sword into the wall or something. It's like, oh, that was a sexual act. It's like, come on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. It's like there's this like one book of like vaguely tame literary criticism that's been passed around as like, English classes for all of high school forever. And they keep removing books because they're like, oh, this one's too wild. And you're like, guys, can you talk to human beings about topics that maybe are off color ever? Like,
yeah. Well,
like,
my
10th
grade English teacher.
Yeah.
My 10th grade English teacher was sort of formative for me, I think, and he actually got a little bit of flack from some parents because his thing was, and I don't know how this would fly today. Actually, I do know how this would fly today. It wouldn't fly well at all. His thing was finding all of the sexual innuendo in stories, like the double entendre. Like, here's what really was going on here. Even 2001: A Space Odyssey, like he screened that and he's like, here's all the sexual images, in this film. And it's like it could be there, and it could have been intentional, and it's absolutely there when you see it. Like, you can't not think about it. But some parents weren't that keen on him, kind of promoting that content in otherwise seemingly harmless literature.
Huh.
But that
was there a point
was
though?
interesting to me.
Like, was he?
Well,
like...
I mean, there was other symbolism in stories that he was finding, but that was part of the subtext that I think he was pointing out that there's subtext in stories, and the authors, the images that they choose and the way that they describe things, like they had some reason behind it. And I'm not sure why he was fixated on that in particular, but it was very interesting, and not because I now, insert that into my stories or look for it in stories, but because that may have been the first time that I actually was taught to analyze fiction and authorial intent in that way, for whatever that's worth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think to a certain extent, there's a lot of fear when it comes to like talking to kids about stuff like that. So like maybe mentioning it kind of diffuses the taboo nature. It's like, yeah, so this is about sex. You guys know what it is. Don't lie to me. And this is the way they're talking about it. You can talk about it whatever way you'd like to, because that's your prerogative. Like, even
it
the
also
idea
could have been
of
a way to
allowing
get teenagers like interested in reading, I suppose. Like, hey, I know this looks like a really boring story that you're not interested in, but
right.
If you look a little bit deeper, there's all this racy stuff happening.
Yeah.
Just use your imagination.
Yeah, it's like, guys, okay, we're gonna read this Scarlet Letter. Don't groan. It's about a woman who sleeps with a guy, and then everyone gets super mad at her, and they're like, oh, like, yep, everything on the internet every day. Like, yeah, it's fine. You get it.
Yeah.
Let's just read it. Let's pretend this is, a Kardashian, and you'll be in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, man, I wonder, it's funny because when you mentioned it, it like made me think of like all these avant-garde artists I've known in my life who do these like weird, insane projects where you're like, okay, cool, man. And I don't get it, but then later when they talk about it, you're like, oh, he's so into this like concept. Okay. So I wonder if, your teacher was just sort of, he was taking a job in a school but he was like truly meant to be on like the Lower East Side, like doing like art pieces and like throwing poop on the wall and being like, this is the essence of humanity. Like,
I'll have to actually ask him, because
do you still talk to him?
Since then, like since my first book came out, like he found me somehow. One of my old teachers went to one of my events, and then he told a bunch of the other teachers what I was up to. Yay. And so they're obviously very, very proud of me and very supportive. So we interact on Facebook from time to time, and it's pretty interesting.
But, wow, that's wild. Yeah. Man,
yeah, he's a fun guy. Yeah.
Wild. So we were talking about, you had this idea for a sci-fi story, but then you shelved it and you were like, I'm not going to do this anymore. At what point in your, later progression as an adult or whatnot, did you get back into writing?
Mm-hmm. I guess I never really left. Like, even though I didn't continue writing that novel, I still found other ways to pursue it. Actually, that reminds me, when I was in the 7th grade, I had a teacher. I wrote a story. The assignment was to write a story in the style of like another author. So I chose Edgar Allan Poe, and I wrote a story. It was kind of cool. It was about a character who is forced to relive he murders somebody, and his punishment is to relive the death through the eyes of the person he's murdered, which years later I actually saw as like a Star Trek Voyager episode. So that was, it was kind of cool. And I'm sure somebody had done something like that before, that even though I wasn't aware of it, but she had scribbled on the back of it, like, see me about a contest. And I didn't. And I sort of, like, looking back, I was like, I wish I had talked to her about this, because I completely dismissed it, and she didn't push it, and I might have gone down a different path, or arrived, at writing earlier. But around the same time, I actually, the writing that I did in the 7th and 8th grade was, I actually wrote spec scripts for Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and then for Star Trek Voyager, and I actually sent them into the studio, because at the time Paramount accepted unsolicited submissions. They were, I think, the only television series to do that. And so I was really serious about it. I wrote these things out, and then I typed them up, and I put them in an envelope, and I mailed them, and then I waited and waited and waited. And of course they were rejected, but that was probably the first time I actually said, okay, I'm going to write something, and I really want this to go somewhere. And I followed through and submitted it, and then, got rejected like writers do. We have to kind of go through that.
I've never heard that. Like, I didn't know
that. They did. I think there's maybe 3 or 4 episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation that sort of came in that way. And I do remember that, I think in the 6th season or in the 7th season, it was even a news story that this teenager had actually gotten his episode. He had sold an episode to them, and they reworked it, quite a bit. But that was something to aspire to, And I saw this other kid. I was like, okay, well, that's possible. Like, he wrote an episode, he sent it in, and they liked it enough to turn it into an actual show. So I'm really jealous of that guy. I should actually see if he's done anything since then, just to kind of like satisfy my professional curiosity. But
you never know.
And a couple of my friends have written episodes.
One of the things I'm learning as I go along in my own creative career is that, sometimes the people who you work with, who you consider like high level, really into it, the best, the cream of the crop, they'll burn out of it earlier. Mm-hmm. Like, you'll be like, oh, I wonder what this person's doing. They were the lead in everything. And it's like, oh, like, he actually works at a farmer's market now, like, and he grows, mushrooms. And you're like, what? Okay. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Well, it takes a lot out of you.
Yeah.
We can talk more about it later if we get to it. But, my first book came out in 2012. And I was part of a group of other debut authors. We were called the Apocalypses. And it was maybe 130 something authors who were all debuting over the course of the year. And a lot of them aren't really working or aren't really publishing anymore. They may still be writing, or they may be writing different things. But there's a lot who just for one reason or another haven't been publishing, and they may still be working at it. But it's a long game. It takes to have a career in publishing, a creative career. Sometimes there's a lot of emphasis placed on producing a lot of material, and sort of like striking while the iron's hot. Like, okay, well, I sold this thing, and so now I'm I have to keep up the demand. But that's how you burn out. That is how you sometimes, I think, your priority shift a little bit. And it's a tough industry, so I can understand why people may sour on it a little bit
sure.
after their debut year.
Yeah, interesting. So you're clearly got your eyes open for opportunities. I mean, to even see that Star Trek is accepting submissions and then to actually do the work and make it happen. I mean, that's just, you've already got the sort of natural drive to get it done. Later on, how did you, was it that natural drive that got you things like your, agent and were you writing and submitting to contests? Like, how did you get into the business?
Yeah. So the next thing that I tried to do, writing wise, is college, end of college. I found out about, I think it was like Disney and Nickelodeon had a writing program.
Yeah.
Like a workshop, and so I really wanted to get involved with one of those, and I think I had my eyes set on Nickelodeon, and so to enter to submit an application, you needed to write a spec script based off of another. This was for their animation division, like a TV show or something like that. So I wrote a spec script for an episode of Cat Dog, and I sent it in, and I didn't get into the internship. But that was, again, like, it was totally something that I would write, because it was about cat dog. So I don't know if you ever seen the show, but it's about it's a two-headed creature. One head is a dog and the other head is a cat. And best not think about the biology of that too much. But I wrote an episode called Static Quo, where they get sucked through their laundry machine, through the dryer, into an alternate universe where they meet Dog Cat. So that's totally something I would write. And I didn't get in, but that kind of having the. I always thought that I wanted to write for television or film. Like, I wanted to do something creative in those areas. And when I was in college, I was pursuing. I was taking film classes, and I really wanted to have a career in television or film, but I didn't want to move out to Los Angeles. And since I didn't get that internship, I was like, well, how can I keep doing something creative that, can lead me to publication or, to working on a show or something like that. And of course, I was always a big reader of science fiction and fantasy, and I had been reading like short fiction. And you can write a story and send it in from anywhere. Like, you can write anywhere and you can mail it in, and if it gets published, it's not because of who you met or any connections that you made. You could have like a normal day job and still pursue that. And so that's really when I started. So 2001 is really when I started to sit down and say, okay, I want to be a professional writer. How do I do that? And so a lot of that was obviously, it was writing, and it was doing a lot of research on how, what markets are there to send your stories to, what's the right format to submit your manuscripts in, because it's all very particular.
Yeah.
And that's really the beginning of me kind of starting to treat it as more than just a hobby. At the time, it was still a hobby, but it was something that I was doing with like intent, And from there, I wrote for about 4 years before, and I wasn't selling anything, and I reached a point where I wasn't improving. I tried to start a couple of writing groups just to kind of have some motivation and get some feedback on what I was doing. But the thing that really helped me out was I applied to the Clarion West Writers Workshop, and it's a 6-week intensive workshop with 17 other authors, and each week you have a different author or editor who teaches the classes and leads the workshop, and a lot of people call it like a boot camp. for writers. It's some people say, maybe I'm the only one who says this, but I heard it somewhere where it's condensing like 6 years of writing experience into 6 weeks. And
Whoa.
And for me, that was absolutely the case. You're right. I was writing a new story every week. I was reading 2 or 3 stories every day and critiquing them in a roundtable discussion with other authors. So we learned from each other the things that each of us were seeing in the stories and the ideas that we were having, and then we were also getting feedback on our own work. And I had great instructors. My first week instructor was Octavia Butler. It was the last year that she taught. I had Andy Duncan, Connie Willis, Michael Swanwick. These are like amazing people who have built incredible writing careers at both writing short fiction and novels. So to have access to them, and again, and in a way, a lot of it was also like seeing that there were people like us, who struggled. They don't always sell everything. It took them a long time in some cases to publish. Or even to attend a workshop like that. And so kind of humanizing it a little bit is like, okay, well, this is an attainable thing for me. If I work hard enough at this, I can succeed at it,
Did they give you like a blueprint of the business as well? Or was it largely like, hey, you should work on a project and we'll give you notes on that project?
It was so we would each write a story every week, and then that would get workshopped, and so we would get notes on that, and it would be, some of it might be line level stuff, but a lot of it would be developmental, and then some of it would also be writing advice or career advice. We got, with each of the instructors, we got about a half an hour to talk to them about anything we wanted. We could talk about our stories, we could talk about their work, their careers, pretty much anything. And so that was really the moment where you can get the a little bit more of insight over what are your odds of publishing, and what should I do now. And we also had guests who came in and told us a little bit more about the business. So it was it did encapsulate like all of that. But you can also find a lot of that information online and in books, which is probably how a lot of people found the workshop in the first place. So these are people who are like really invested in making a career of it, and like you said, motivated enough to find out how to do that.
Yeah, it's really important. I mean, the legwork part of a creative career is like crazy. I mean, even just being like, wait, this is how that works? Or like, oh, wait, I have to have this and that before I can do anything? Like, I mean, from my point of view, I have an acting agent, but I'm not SAG. And they, like, even just knowing what those sentences mean, like, is like, some people are like, what? I'm just in Improv 101. Like, so everybody's at different levels of, like, figuring out what they're doing and, like, what they're interested in. But I, like, love how sort of focused you seem to be. Now, I know that you're, like, jumping years and, like, telling me the highlights, and I dig it. But, like... But, like, it's so great that you seem to, have found a way not only to do something, but, like, that you have the drive to get the information, make it work. So did this workshop give you great connections that helped move you forward from here? Was this, like, pivotal in your career, this workshop?
Well, let me see. So in terms of connections, I formed a really, really strong bond with a lot of my classmates, and we all have started to kind of, many of my classmates have risen up in their careers since then. And so those are, quote, connections, but they're also, they're friendships. And it was great to kind of be in the trenches with people and encourage each other. And so like some of my classmates, like Anne Leckie, who wrote The Ancillary Justice, which won like every major science fiction fantasy award. She was in my class, and Kat Rambo, who's was the president of SFWA, the Science Fiction Writers of America, the writing guild for science fiction and fantasy authors. Like a lot of the people who started out with me in 2005, like they're publishing pretty consistently and winning awards and starting magazines and editing and things like that. And but that doesn't necessarily help me sell my work. I think the thing that I actually did really just improve in my skill while I was there. So my wife had seen my writing before I went to the workshop, and a little bit during, and then immediately afterwards. And she said, you have gotten so much better. And she doesn't say that lightly. She was an editor of children's books once upon a time. And so she has a really strong editorial eye. So she knows she knows exactly what my writing was like before I went to this thing, and 6 weeks later. So that was probably the biggest thing, that I just learned to think about my writing in a different way, and I changed my processes a bit. Where in the past, when I was writing on my own before the workshop, I would write a story and then I'd kind of noodle with it for a while, and then I'd send it to people and I'd wait until they got back to me, and then I'd revise it and then I'd send it out. But I wouldn't be really writing anything else while I was working on that, like one story. So that's one story could take me like a month and a half or something, or longer, before I felt like I was ready and I could move on to the next thing. At Clarion West, I was writing a brand new story every week, whether or not I had worked out what that story was about. Sometimes I would just have an idea and we're like, all right, sit down, just start writing, see what comes out, and having that change in my process, where, because I used to not start a story until I figured I knew the beginning, the middle, and the end, and I felt like I was, quote, ready to work on it. You don't have that kind of time frame, when you have to turn out a new story every week. So sometimes I would just jump in and say, all right, well, here's what I got. And sometimes it worked and often it didn't, but it was all a learning opportunity. And then just thinking about how to critically look at my own writing, and then also figure out how to fix it, or take feedback from other people about my writing and figure out how to incorporate that and make the story work, but still have it be my own thing. So I learned a lot of just the technical aspects of that. And then over the years, I think through the workshop and just going to conventions and things like that, I've gotten a lot of opportunities through relationships with people, through friendships with people, or acquaintances, even when I haven't been networking. There's sometimes a big emphasis on networking, because you have to meet people in order to kind of get published or sell your work or whatever. At least that's the theory, right? But I found that just having a genuine interest in people and making a good impression, and having your relationship be based on something more than just what can you do for me, has done me far better than any attempts I've had to meet somebody just for the sake of meeting them.
Yeah, that can be super hard. I don't like that as well. I don't like having to have a conversation with a person.
It's so icky, isn't it?
It just makes me feel weird. It's especially too, if I meet somebody at a convention and I want to ask them to be on the podcast, it makes me feel like, oh God, my husband's like, you got to do it. It's it's the only chance. And I was like, I know. It just makes me feel like crap. And I know they're at a convention. Yeah. They accept it. When you're in the convention, when you're at the event, everybody's ready for it. They're prepped. They know that's what their day's about. But it's it's just hard, because I prefer stuff almost like this. Once we get to the podcast where it's let's have a conversation about life, about what we love about it. That's the interesting part. There can be a lot of walls up in the beginning of meeting people when you're trying to do business with them. That can be really hard.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. What kind of conventions are you going to? I am often going to comic book conventions and whatnot, just to meet people who are doing cool stuff. But I'm sure you're going to more specific things. What kind of events are you going to?
Well, I haven't been going to that many conventions really since my son was born. He's turning 5 next month, so that dropped off quite a bit.
Yeah.
But I used to go to my favorite convention was ReaderCon, which is in Burlington, Massachusetts, and that was kind of it's a small literary convention. So you're there with readers and writers, and that was really terrific. And I would often go to World Fantasy Con, which is kind of a much bigger version of ReaderCon, with a little bit more sort of general stuff thrown into it, because there's lots of other things like TV and things like that people are interested in. And I've gone to a couple of World Cons, but those were always a little bit too media heavy for me, so I was never really that into those. But the ReaderCon was definitely the one that I would go to year after year until life started to kind of interfere with it. One that I've been going to a lot, that I had been going to a lot since my first book came out, was DragonCon, which is in Atlanta every summer, and that's a huge convention. I think at the last one, it was maybe 88,000 people, Comic-Con level.
Yeah.
And the appeal there was that they have such a phenomenal young adult writers track. So they have a really great programming based around young adult fiction, and they have always been great about getting me on a lot of different panels. And they also have a kaleidoscope programming track for like kids television, and I love cartoons and video games and things. So I was able to get onto some of those. So I love that convention, both because of the people who were going there, but then also because I knew that I would have a lot to do. I'd be on a lot of panels and things like that. So it would be worth my while.
Totally. I never go anywhere unless I can work.
Yeah, you have to justify it somehow. It can be incredibly expensive. For the most part, I've been paying my own way to conventions. But just this past summer, I actually went to a bunch of sort of Comic-Con type conventions that I hadn't been to previously because my publisher sent me to promote my latest book. So I went to Denver Pop Culture Con. I went to Phoenix Fan Fusion, and so if you're going to pay for me to go, if I can get childcare for my son, then I will go wherever you want me to go. And so those were really great. Those were great. It was kind of my first glimpse of what it's like to be kind of sent on tour, like some more prominent authors get.
Yeah, man, I wonder what that's all about. But wait, we're getting ahead of ourselves. I feel like we started talking about so many things. We've gone down so many rabbit holes. Let me try to bring it back. So you've gone to this workshop. Is this workshop before or after the first thing that you've gotten like published? Or is it after like a bunch of magazine articles and website articles, but before a novel? Where is it in your career?
It was really before I started publishing anything. I did sell a very short story, like a flash story, just before I went to the workshop. But for the most part, up to that point, I'd been writing for about 4 years and I hadn't published a single thing, but I'd been writing a lot, and almost pretty much immediately after the workshop, I actually started selling work. And I don't think it's because I went to the workshop, because, you put that on your cover letter and most magazines don't actually really care. But my writing had improved enough that I started selling. So I actually sold like a short story to an anthology that I had written at the workshop. And then I sold like a couple more of those, and I was writing more stories. And I would be selling them to, not professional magazines, not Analog or Asimov or anything like that, but these were like online magazines and anthologies and things like that. But they were story publications, so I was happy with them.
Yeah, heck yeah.
And so I was writing those and selling sporadically for a couple of years, and I had an idea for a novel, and I was telling my wife about it. My girlfriend at the time, and like I said, she had been in like children's publishing, and she's like, that idea sounds like a great idea for a young adult novel. And I didn't know anything about young adult fiction aside from what I'd read when I was a kid. So she gave me a bunch of book recommendations, and I read them. I was like, wow, YA is really great. I had not read it since I was a kid, and it had matured a lot since then. And yeah, she was totally right. Like the story idea that I had was perfect for it. And so I started focusing on writing that. And I worked on the novel. And let's see, I still was writing short stories, while I was writing the novel. So I hadn't quite put short stories by the wayside yet, because I didn't know where the novel was going. But yeah, so that was kind of really the start, because I had a much higher success rate in the end of selling novels than I did of short stories up to a point. So I wrote a book over the course of maybe 6 or 7 months, and then I revised it for another 3 or 4 months, and then I started looking for an agent, and that was the.
Do you send the finished book to people?
Well, yeah. I mean, I got critiques on it. I had joined a writing group in New York since then. Actually, that was one of the connections that I did make through Clarion West. One of my classmates at Clarion West, Chris Dykman, was in a writing group called Altered Fluid in New York. And so we went to the workshop, and she said, when we get back to New York, you're going to join my writing group, or I'll introduce you to my writing group. And so I became a part of that, and that really helped me a lot in terms of keeping up my productivity and continuing to improve my craft, because it was like an extension of Clarion West, really. And at the time, we were all incredibly prolific and very hungry to publish, and so we were meeting like 2 or 3 weeks out of the month, to go over 2 or 3 stories, and and I was writing really fast. I was writing a lot of stuff, and so I was probably every month I had a new story, just to kind of keep things going. So it was really great for my productivity, just to kind of keep that as a priority in my life. Because I came back from the workshop and I thought, okay, I had the validation of going to this workshop in the first place. There's something there, and then coming out of it, I felt more excited than ever that I could actually, publish if I worked at it. And so I came back really sort of thinking about writing not as a hobby, but as a second job. It was like I really need to focus on this and make it much more important in my day-to-day life than it had been in the past. So I started, that's really when I stopped watching as much TV as I used to, and I would not play video games. And I really just, when I wasn't working or hanging out with my friends or my family, I was writing,
Yeah, totally. Do you think the group aspect helped buoy your productivity? Like, because you go to the workshop, you got all these people around you, you get all this feedback, and then, you get home and, they say, hey, to figure it out, do it at home by yourself now. But getting into the writers group, is that kind of like, because that group aspect really help keep you going, keep you sort of accountable?
Oh, definitely. Yes. Accountable is the perfect word for it, because, if we were going to have a meeting, then we needed people to volunteer stories for everyone to critique. And so there would always be that pressure. And then you have the pressure. Okay, well, I said I'd turn in a story for next week's meeting. That means I have to write a story by, Saturday. So I had the pressure, I had a deadline. Deadlines, as it turns out, are incredibly motivating for me.
Love a deadline.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hate deadlines, but I wouldn't write anything if I didn't have deadlines. So, at least not anymore, like which we'll get into. But yeah, deadlines, it's too easy to kind of just push it off, if you don't have anybody saying, okay, well, you need to give me this thing by a certain time. Right.
Yeah. Right. Oh man. So you have deadlines. Yeah. You have more deadlines now. Well, you have a body of work and people expect things from you now. So how do we get to, so you're with the writers group. I'm loving this, by the way. I feel like every time I talk to writers, it's like, so I'm alone in my room and I do the work. And like, you're like, oh, okay, great. I'm glad. But like you're like all these community and like meeting people and getting out there. Like you're so social as a writer. So it's like,
well,
awesome.
I was lucky because I was in New York, which isn't an opportunity that all writers have. And I had this writing group, and you're absolutely right. It was a community. We hung out together outside of the group. We went on writing retreats together. We would do writing days, and I'm not even sure if I'm the one who started that or if it was just something that people that they had been doing. But I feel like I was instrumental in making it more of a thing. In that it was like, okay, well, I want to go write. Who wants to come with me? Let's go hang out at the coffee shop together, and we'll write together. So you're taking this what traditionally is like a solitary activity. And turning into more of like hanging out, you're socializing with people. I mean, provided there are moments where you're all focused and you have to concentrate on what you're doing. You have to actually, do the work, but it feels more fun when you're going to meet somebody to, go hang out at this place. And we would meet in coffee shops or like my office and write in the conference room or things like that. Like we turned it into a much more of a social activity than it usually is, I think.
That's fun. I love a good after-hours conference room writing. That's super awesome.
Oh yeah. We had our meetings at various offices over the years. Because just finding free space in New York is a challenge.
Oh yeah.
So I've always been lucky that I've worked at places where they were like, yeah, sure, that's fine. You can use the conference space.
Love it. That's so fun. So you're working with this group, and then you got your first novel. Now and so my question earlier, which I think I kind of muddied, was not like, were you when you finished it, were you getting edits from people? But like you said, I finished my first novel and then I tried to get an agent. When you're trying to get an agent, you don't send them the complete book and say, hey, read this, want to be my agent? That's not how it works, is it?
Well, I don't know how it is now, but I had to do the research. So again, you had to sort of motivate yourself to like figure out, okay, well, how do you find an agent? And so I read all the blogs and I went on websites and read all the advice about it. And essentially, what you do is you start querying agents, and that means you do all this research. You have to write a query letter, which is a one-page kind of summary of your. Actually, it's like a couple of paragraphs describing your book, in a letter, to get them interested. And then you also write a synopsis, which is maybe 2 or 3 pages of the novel. And you do all this research, figure out, okay, what agents are open to submissions and interested in the type of work that this is, and how do they want to receive their submissions? Because at the time, some of them would want just a letter. Some of them would want the letter and a synopsis. Some of them would want a letter and a synopsis in the first 3 chapters. So you had to really find out like what each of them wanted. And this was around 2007, 2008 that I was querying. And so a lot of it was still, through the mail. It wasn't all email submissions and things like that. So some of these things I had to actually mail them out, and then wait for a letter back. And I was very methodical about it. I did all this research. I customized every letter to every agent. I had a spreadsheet of like, what do they want? What did I send them? When did I send it? What kind of response did I get? And I sent it out in waves. I would send out like 3 or 4 a week. And that way, because it took time to research the agents. And based on how people were responding to the query letters, I might tweak the letter for the next batch, So it was a lot of work. It was a lot of work, but it was also exciting to learn this new aspect of the business, because I knew how to submit short stories already. Novels were a totally different area to figure out how to do it. So I kind of reveled in that a little bit, just kind of learning the right way to do it.
Be still my heart. Spreadsheets with research about agents. I love it. I can't tell you the number of spreadsheets I've made over my life, various things, which apartment to move into, which podcast platforms to start with. Oh, so many spreadsheets.
I don't even like Excel, but this thing I built had, drop downs for like, when they would send me a response asking for the, because sometimes you'll get a note back saying, okay, well, send me the first 3 chapters. Like that, there was a drop down for that. And I had like little things to calculate the number of days it had been on submission and things like that. It was ridiculous.
I love it. It's so great. And here's the thing. Okay, so audience who's listening to this, I don't think it's required that you're so type A about how you get this information, but you do need to get this information and keep yourself organized enough that you can get yourself an agent. So don't worry, it's not required for you to be this organized. I love this kind of organization, so I'm like super excited about it. But don't worry, everybody, you don't have to be this organized to get it done. Though I love, again, the information that you found, what each person really needs, how that works out. That's really wonderful. Even the staggering sending it out. That's a smart move. That is smart. I love it. So you sent it out. You found an agent. How'd you get the first novel published?
So it took about 6 or 7 months before I got the agent. And then my book was actually on submission for 2 years. It was out there for a long time. I was writing other things, while that was happening. I was working on the next book when that happened. But after 2 years of being rejected by the major publishers and a lot of the not major publishers, we ended up selling it to. So the first book is called Fair Coin. We ended up selling it to Pirate Books, which had only just started their own young adult line. They had previously been publishing only adult science fiction and fantasy. So we kind of got in there with the timing. The timing worked out, and they were interested in a weird book like mine that kind of blended science fiction and fantasy. So it was just kind of some of it was just sometimes in publishing. You really need to work hard in publishing. You need to be persistent. Sometimes it's just about timing and about luck, And even my agent, I hadn't queried my agency at the beginning, the whole process. I did query them towards the end when they had just hired a new agent who was specifically going to be working on young adult fiction. So sometimes it was just like the timing worked out, and because I stuck with it long enough, I was able to have that opportunity. If I'd given up sooner, I wouldn't have queried them, or we wouldn't have sold that book. Things like that. So there is absolutely an element of luck, but you can create your own luck in some ways because you're putting yourself out there and you're doing the work.
Yeah. There's definitely something to, there is luck, but, the people who are putting themselves out there and making sure that people see what they're doing and getting it in front of eyes and, just getting their names out so that people think of them when it comes to certain kinds of writers, even just, like you were saying before, as a panelist, that's super helpful to get out there if you're not constantly, and I don't like this phrase, but hustling, then, your whole situation is going to, just be you alone in a room. Purely just even just the socialization connected with a writer's group or, having other people give you edits as you go around, like just sharing it and getting it out there, I think is just sort of the first steps, but it's a good step to get you used to getting other people to have opinions and not being so precious about your words. That's the hardest part, I think, sometimes. I teach comedy writers, and I'll teach like sketch comedy, and they'll hand me something and I'll rip it apart. And they're like, they get real upset about it. I'm like, oh, okay, listen, you can't get that. You can't hold on to every possible thing, especially in this particular class, because my job is to show you how to do things better. So I'm going to show you how to do things better. That's just what I'm doing. So, but the other thing too is like, I have had times when I've written something and I thought it was super great, and then everybody in the room, all the actors, and as we're directing it, working on it, they're like, no, we need to change this, this, and this will make it funnier. And I'm like, if everybody in the room is saying it, what am I gonna, I'm not gonna argue. This is 10 people saying this is a funnier choice, I'm gonna do it. I feel like being able to get a tough enough skin to then receive edits and do that. So that seems like, to me, like sort of the next leveling up for you. Like, you went to the workshop, your skill got better. Now you're doing all this business. You sell the one, you kind of get some business acumen, like you're figuring it out. You're up to the next level now. How do you maintain this? How have you, because you've sold multiple novels and now you're working on other kinds of writing. Tell me what is the life like? You also mentioned earlier something about, I've written down deadlines. So you said we'll talk about that later. Tell me what that is. What's your life like now? Like, you get so much to do? Is there like a big, you have a bunch of things that you have in the coffers? How does it work for you?
Yeah. So we sold my first two books, and then there was and then I had my next book on submission for a while again, it didn't sell, and that was kind of crushing because I had worked on it a lot, like really hard. I thought it was better than my first book. I thought it was going to be, sort of the one that would make a big splash, and then there was a lot of excitement about it from publishers, and then we didn't sell it. So I was kind of down on publishing for a little bit, but the next big opportunity for me was I was approached to do a work for hire project. So that was the Silence of Six, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to do it or not. But I thought also, okay, well, if I really want to make it in this business, I have to be able to write things on deadline. I have to be able to write proposals and like turn around a book in a short period of time. So like, I wanted to take this on as a challenge to myself. Can I do this? So that's why I took it on. And I had to audition for it and everything. They selected me. And then I essentially had to write like a first draft in like 3 months, which is ridiculous. Going from like, you can take as much time as you want to write your first novel, and then that's when the deadlines come in, because when you sell your second one, now there are expectations and you have to turn things around on like the publishing schedule, which is very, very slow to get back to you, but very, very fast when they need something back from you. So that was the thing. So that was a work for hire project. It was my own book. Like, I came up with this, aside from like the sort of the germ for the story, I came up with the plot and the characters and all this stuff. So and it's done really well. But for me, it was also like I wouldn't have had a book published in 2014 if I hadn't taken advantage of that. Like the timeline of that book was so short that the book came out really, really quickly. Even if I'd sold my novel, it wouldn't have been out for, my original novel, it wouldn't have been out for like 2 or 3 years,
So when you say work for hire, is it like, here's 27 ideas we bought from people, turn one of them into a novel, like on a timeline?
So kind of like the novel in particular was, so the company was Adaptive Books, and their whole MO was they would take abandoned intellectual property and to turn it into something else. And so in this case, they wanted to take an unproduced screenplay and turn it into a young adult novel. And then ideally at some point they would turn that young adult novel into another screenplay, but we haven't gotten there yet. And so they gave me just a very, very basic, so again?
That was hilarious. Just the idea of like, it was a screenplay and now it's a novel, and then the novel's going to become a screenplay. Like, oh, people, so funny.
Well, that's Hollywood.
Yeah,
they were based in LA.
I love it.
So they gave me just like very high level, like, okay, this is like the first scene, and then like, where does the story go from there? They wouldn't even let me read the script because they were like, the script is not, like, just don't read it. So I just wrote an entirely different outline. I wrote a whole outline on it, and we went back and forth on it before they greenlit it, and then I wrote the book, and then we did revisions and things like that. And it's a work for hire in that I don't own any of the like copyright to it, so I don't really, aside from what they pay me at the outset, I don't get any like royalties or anything on that.
Totally,
which is a shame because it's sold very well.
Sure. But you know what, though, a lot of the movie stuff is like that. Like, think about the person who wrote that first screenplay. They got a chunk of cash for whatever, but none of the words or story that they wrote will make it. You know what I mean? Like, I've heard from so many people who do movie stuff, like, there's like 47 edits and they're all from different people, and you just get your chunk and that's it. Like, so I don't know. I'm hoping that novels can keep you with money forever, but working in movies and selling writing like that is very, very piecemeal from what I hear from people.
Yeah. Well, and my focus is maybe different from a lot of writers in that I have a day job. I've always had a day job. I still call it a day job, because to separate it from like what I do with my writing outside of it.
Sure.
But it's not something that I've ever said, okay, well, I really want to quit my job and focus on writing full time. Like, if I could do that, that would be awesome. But that's not like a priority for me. And so I haven't felt the pressure of like, I have to churn out a book a year, or I have to like you say, hustle to find all these opportunities. So I can take the time, in between projects to work on my own thing or not work on my own thing. And, after that book, after I turned in that book, like, my son was born, and I tried to juggle, like, when I was writing the sequel to that book, also under contract, like, I was trying to take care of him at the same time. Like, my wife was a resident at med school, so I was like the primary caregiver.
Yeah.
So trying to juggle like work and that extra writing and him was a challenge. And so I basically, like, after I sort of burned out after that second book, which I had to again turn around in a really short period of time. And for the next couple of years, I just kind of slowed down a bit. I wrote short stories here and then when I was invited to submit to an anthology, but I just didn't prioritize the writing as much as I had, when I was starting out, because I wanted to, I didn't want to resent the time I was spending with my son and think, oh, I need to write. So I need to just kind of get through this, or, get him to bed or whatever so that I can write.
Yeah.
And when I was writing, I didn't want to think about what I was missing with him.
Yeah.
So to make it a little bit easier on myself, like, you have to forgive yourself sometimes, I think.
You really do.
Writers, creative people, you need to forgive yourself a little bit. And, to an extent, like, I think you need to build the discipline. Like, I had the discipline when I need it, but I also needed to kind of reset and, like, take a little break. And so
totally, man,
things slow down for a little bit.
You get it. I'm in there. I'm right there. I'm right in the midst of, like, I can't get an idea out without being like, what's the baby doing right now? Like, oh man, it is such a wild situation. But, I think good for, we're creators, we're storytellers. We can't just, not live a life. We have to like soak up real life and have these like visceral experiences so that then when we write our, what is coming out of us is real and not just, fabricated in a way that's like, this is a person doing a thing. It's like, no, this is real life. You've experienced it. You've been part of the down and dirty thick of it. I mean, and boy, howdy, early childhood development. Whoo! Yowza. So I get it. Man, that's so wild. So it's cool. Were you like getting back on the horse when you took the work for hire assignments? Like, was that like how you got kind of back into it?
Well, so those two books, like I was still on the horse for those two books, The Sounds of Six and Against All Silence. And then, I got off the horse when my son was born. It slowed down quite a bit. What kind of got me back in? So I've been working on some serials for a company called Serial Box, and they're essentially you're writing short stories, but they're all kind of linked. Their thing is kind of trying to be like the HBO of fiction, like written fiction. So they would kind of plan out a season of a show, which was essentially a novel, and each of those short stories is like an episode, So I got involved with them on some projects, and that was really great. It was really nice to just have work that was coming out, that people would say, oh, he's still writing, I still had work. I still had a little bit of money coming in, and I was still, I was doing creative work. And that was kind of like, still had my toe in that. I started a middle grade novel that I haven't finished yet. And then more recently last year, again, this was another opportunity that came to me through an editor who had been recommended to me by a friend, looking to have somebody write another work for hire, a tie-in project linked to RWBY, which is an animated series. And again, at the time, I was like, well, I don't really know RWBY yet. Let me check it out and see what it is. And I really liked it. And I was like, okay, I don't have any big projects coming up. I don't have any novels coming out. It would be great to do that and kind of get back into it. And so that's kind of, it came with a very, very tight deadline. So again, like the deadlines kind of helped motivate me to get some work done. So I worked on that book, and I'm now working on the sequel to that. And I've been working on some more serials, and I've got another project that hasn't been announced yet. So I've been writing.
You mentioned that some of the work for hires are like things that you're not getting credit for. You like get paid to be, writer X, and then like you're out. But the other ones,
well, you do get credit. I do get credit for it. Like my name is on that book.
Okay. It's like story by or something like that. Whatever the words are.
No. It's my book. Like my name is on it. At least for The Sons of Six, like my name's the only one on there. Most people to readers, it isn't even transparent whether a book is a work for hire or not, unless they like look at the copyright page or like are really into the business and saying, well, is this his original idea or not? Like where did this come from? The RWBY books, because they're part of a shared world, like they're part of a TV series, like I am still credited as the author, but the story credit still goes to the show writers.
Right. Who created the world, right?
Yeah. But I'm the author. My name is on that book. And for me,
good.
It's really important to work on projects like that where I have a sense of ownership over where the story goes and how those characters develop, because otherwise you could just hire anybody to like paint by numbers and like write a book based off of some outline, not that I wouldn't necessarily work on something like that, but it would have to be like the right kind of project, like I've auditioned for books that were kind of designed by committee, and I haven't gotten those projects, and but some of those is like, well, here's your outline. You're just going to write the scenes as we've written them, as we've described. You're just going to kind of essentially like flesh it out. I'm like, that would probably be less interesting to me,
Well, but you mentioned the work that you were doing with is it Serial Box, and that's that's some of the sci-fi work that you've been doing with the new Orphan Black series. Was there a writer, like a story written for that? Was that like, was it like, There's two different styles I'm imagining in my head, and I'm going to tell you both of them, and they're probably both wrong. One way of doing it is like they write, this is what's going to happen in the season, and then they give each one of you guys an episode, which is kind of what happens in TV. Or did like one person write the first one, and then like writer number 2 gets the first one and gets to continue it on the story, and then writer number 3 gets 1 and 2 to read and then continues the story, and they can make decisions. Which way did that work? And
it's more like the first thing. It's more like we actually do run it like the writers' room of a TV show. So awesome. So all the writers get together for like 3 days, and we hammer out the plot. We think about all the characters. We figure out all of the individual like character arcs and things like that. And you know, we had come in with we had a sort of a story Bible, at least like a pitch for like what the story would be like, but we still had to kind of figure it out. We had to like quote break the story, you know, and figure out where is this going. So at that point, so we're all in the room and we're all like coming up with ideas for the season, you know, for the series. And then we kind of break it down episode by episode, like this is what has to happen to keep the story moving and to put these characters where they need to be, you know, et cetera. And then we divide up like who's going to write what. But because of the time frame involved, we can't write them in sequence like that. You know, like, okay, well, I'm going to write the first episode and then somebody can take it from there, like passing the baton. We would all write, say we would do them in phases. So like phase 1 might be the first 4 or 5 episodes, the first 4 or 5 stories. And we would all like we would write outlines, and then we would share them, and we would all look at the outlines and say, okay, well, this looks like that'll work. We figure out, you know, all the details of it. And then once we had all kind of agreed, then we all go off and write our individual episodes. So hopefully they're going to line up with the outline, because the person who's writing episode 4 needs to have an idea of what happens in episodes 1 through 3. But sometimes things deviate, or they don't line up quite right, or they just, you know, take a different turn. So then we just we're talking about, so we get those first drafts in, and then we all read them and talk again, you know, see like how we have to adjust things. So we're writing concurrently, and then we have to make it all line up, which is challenging. It's very challenging, but to meet that production deadline, like you have to do it that way.
And that was like a heavily deadline situation, and they just hired everybody and put you in a room together. That sounds so cool. It sounds like such a fun project.
It's a lot of fun. It's the third serial that I've worked on, and each serial has been different in terms of, you know, the personalities who are in the room and you know what we all bring to it. But it's so collaborative. It's so exciting, and it's really I feel like it almost reminds me of like back in the workshop days, because I feel like I learned so much from my fellow writers. Like one of us might be really great at doing these descriptions, or one of us might be really great with like scientific, you know, background and terminology. And maybe this person's really great at doing dialogue or you know, character. I mean, we're all competent or good at those individual things, but some of us are better than others. You know, we all have different things that we bring to the table. And so we've been able to, like, at least I've learned from the others for sure.
It's just so awesome that, like, it's because what's cool about it too is, especially when it comes to like when you're writing something that doesn't have to be filmed, there's so much more freedom, because it's like we could explode everything every minute and no one has to pay for that, or we don't have to hire a fire marshal at all. Like, that's the cool part about all the things where it's like, and with sci-fi, you can just go so much farther versus like, I feel like the number one thing that I'm always worried about when I'm doing shows is like, how much is stuff going to cost? Like we can come up with as many jokes as you want, but you know, if we have a joke with 1 million whoopee cushions, somebody's going to buy 1 million whoopee cushions, and that's not me. Like, it's just so, you know, it's just wild, you know, that you can put this all together. And it's so fun. So are you like hired by Serial Box and then they say, hey, work on a project? Or are you part of a team that pitches to Serial Box, hey, we want to write this thing?
I haven't been I think so far as I know, the serials that they've been pitched have been from, you know, individual writers who say, hey, I have this idea. And then when they say, okay, yeah, we want to do that, then they build their team from there. And so that's kind of how I've come on to most of the projects. I worked on, my first one was called Remade, and then someone I wrote Remade with pitched a series called Alternis, and she invited me to participate in that. And then the Orphan Black series I had been writing with Serial Box for a while, so they asked me if I'd be interested in writing that, since I already had built up that relationship. But talk about deadlines. So what happened was I went for probably a year or so, or even a couple of years of not writing very much. I was writing short stories here and there, but I wasn't working on anything serious. And then I started working on Alternis, and around the time that when I was starting to start work on Alternis, the RWBY book came along, and I didn't want to say no to that. So I was then writing Alternis and RWBY at the same time. And then Orphan Black came along, and they invited me, and I was like, I don't know if I can make this work, but I don't want to say no to that either. So I was essentially working on those three things, the three projects. They were overlapping with each other, or sometimes coming very close to each other. So those deadlines, were very, very motivating, but it was also really exhausting. So it's been like the last year's been really busy for me after having not done that much for 2 years before that.
Yeah, but you totally leveled up. Now that's what you're well, you know what I mean? Like when you get older, or when you work on something, your skill moves up, and then your drive moves up, and then what you've done, you move to the next level of this and that and that. And the idea that because I remember you were talking about, before you went to the workshop, before you went to the Clarion West Workshop, you would work on one thing for 2 or 3 months. Mm-hmm. And then the workshop helped you to be able to work on things faster and get them done. And now you're working on multiple things at the same time, coming up with these ideas, keeping them compartmentalized, but still moving forward and doing the work. And that's totally leveling up as far as skill and proficiency, and just being able to, your brain is now so much more primed to getting it done. You're juggling these things when, years ago, somebody threw you a ball and you were like, I can't catch that. I don't know what that is. You know what I mean? It's a new world, and it's awesome. I'm so happy that, because from my point of view of being in the mom place where I'm I'm not doing anything, and then it's oh my God, there's so much more stuff to be done. And also just from the idea of your stuff where you were well, I don't know, I'm going to take a break. And then it was doesn't matter that you took a break. We're pulling you in. We got 1,000 things, super fun. And maybe so many more after that, I mean, then, if you keep working with the same people and you're having a great time, that sounds awesome. Sounds so cool.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. What are you working on? So what are you working on right now? Are you still working on all these Serial Box projects, or are you working on the novel?
I think I've wrapped up Orphan Black for now. I am working on revisions to the second RWBY book, Before the Dawn, which will be out in July 2020. And then I'm also working on so yeah, there again, I have overlapping deadlines. I'm working on another project on a very short turnaround. I can't say what it is yet, but that's they're basically due at the same time. The two things are due at the same time. And I've kind of been able to negotiate the deadlines a little bit, so I have a little bit of time. But I'm going to be burning through my vacation days at work to make it happen. And sometimes I have to hire a babysitter to watch my son. On the weekends. Yeah. My wife is still really busy, kind of doing her thing. So she's actually not around a lot. So my writing time is still really sparse.
Yeah.
I still I used to write mostly on weekends, and I don't even always get the weekends anymore. So it's been really, really challenging. But and as much as she can help me make those deadlines work, she's always been really supportive on that front. She knows how important it is, and I think she's excited by the work that I'm doing as well. So my whole family has been really, really great about that. But unfortunately, my family isn't really close by. So if I
hear that.
If she's not here, then I'm hiring a sitter. Although my son's gotten a little bit more independent. He's he's turning 5, and so he can now play by himself for a little while, or thank goodness for screen time, so I've been working it in when I can. It's definitely gotten easier than when, he needed me to change his diaper or feed him. He can now function on his own for large periods of time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like he can go to the bathroom and like get a drink of milk if he needs to. It's fine.
Yeah, his thing is he wants to spend time with me. He
yeah, sure.
He wants to play with me. He just wants, if I'm around, he wants me to be with him. Sure. Which is great, but it's, yeah, like I said, it's hard. Yeah. When you have these other things pulling your attention away or pressuring you to do something else.
Yeah. Plus, I can't even, like, you reminded me that you have this day job, and I'm like, wow, like just that, like, though you're telling me all these things and I'm like, whew, so much work. I don't know if I could do all that work, and I don't have a day job. Like, I'm not like, I'm like, wow. And you also go to a job and do that job well enough to keep it. Like, that's great. I mean, hey, no judgment. But like that's amazing. Like that you're maintaining that. And, I mean, the last day job I had, they fired me and said, just go work in the theater. It's what you want to do.
Oh, no.
Like, oh, okay.
Oh, no.
It was both the best and the worst thing ever.
That's a really good point, though. Like, I think that, like, the cereal box projects that I'd worked on, I think that for like 2 or 3 of them, I think I might have been the only writer at the time who actually had like a day job. Like, I had to like be locked into certain hours of my day to go do this other thing. And so that affected flexibility a little bit. But then this new project that I've taken on, I'm working with a new editor, and they asked for some really difficult, like, challenging deadlines. And I said, hey, look, full disclosure, like, I have a day job and I have a 5-year-old. Like, I need more time. Like, I really need more time. Like, I know we have a tight production schedule, and I'll do whatever I have to do, which means I'm taking my vacation time. But, like, just be aware, like, this isn't my only thing, because those deadlines sound totally reasonable if you think, oh, this writer can just drop everything for 2 weeks, and work on this project.
Right.
As opposed to, no, this writer is going to stay up late and get 3 hours of sleep, every night for 2 weeks, and not have weekends, and basically wreck himself to get this deadline, to meet this deadline. So yeah,
man, it's interesting to think about, like the real life of it, because I remember being in like college and dreaming, oh, my life, if I work full time, if I do this, if I'm the person, and it's like real life is a lot crazier than that. So
yeah.
Oftentimes it's like, yeah, you're doing 4,000 things at once. Figure that out. I was actually talking to somebody just the other day about how I was like, college, because college isn't for everybody, but if you want to have a high pressure like life, you probably need to do it. If only just because it's like you need to now learn how to juggle 1,000 things coupled with every possible change in your life you could imagine at once. That's what adulthood is every day. Like,
yeah, even without a kid, and the kid just, everything goes out the window.
It's so
forget about
crazy.
Planning.
Yeah.
Forget about being prepared. You're winging it every day, every minute of the day.
Like, even today, as we were scheduling, I was like, when you were like, oh, I thought we were doing it at this time, and I was like, oh my God, did I do that? Because I'm definitely gonna do that. Like, I was like, what time is it now? I was like, oh my God, because like sometimes, I put things on my phone to remind me, because it's like I wake up at 7 a.m. and then who knows what happens, and then all day long there's just so much time. I'm standing in a park I'm looking at my phone, I'm like, I've been here for 3 hours, get out of here. What? Like, so time doesn't exist in the same way to me. So it's like, I totally understand, like, and the idea of you doing this late at night, like, though that being said, it sounds super hard, and you're doing it, and you're killing it, and you're doing so great, and you're very inspirational. I'm inspired. I want to be doing these kinds of things, and I'm inspired by the work that you do to try to work a little harder to do it myself.
Wow, thank you.
Totally. It's so cool. And it's like just so fun that all these different projects are out there. There's a lot of people that talk about, not only just the loneliness of writing, which clearly you've gotten through, but just getting stuff published, and like then dealing with the business part, and like, how do you get money for this, that? How do you get credit for your own work, this, that? Like, it just seems like, you've taken a lot of good paths and, allowed for some of the weird stuff to happen, but learned from it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure there's been ups and downs, you know, where you're clearly sharing with me a swath of your whole career. But it's like, based on the stories you're telling me as you move along, like I said, you're leveling up, you're like learning, you're like developing, you're like motivating yourself to get to the next level, all the while doing the adulting required of life and having children and making them nice people. It's pretty solid. You're doing a good thing. I can't imagine what else you could be doing. In fact, if you were thinking, I need a new project other than what I'm doing, don't.
Not till after November, for sure.
After November, you're so wild.
But, you know, I clearly have a hard time saying no. So if the right project comes along, sure, pile on.
Oh, my God. Listen, thank you so much, Eugene, for being on the podcast with me and chatting with me and sharing your stories. And you're, like I said, very inspirational, you know, like, drive. It makes me want to do stuff, and it's exciting to know that there are so many options to do it.
Thanks. Yeah, no, this has been great, and I think it's given me a little bit of perspective on sort of where I've ended up and maybe where I'm going. So I definitely enjoyed that aspect of it. So, you know,
I hope so, and I'm glad. Thank you for saying that, because that's all I want to do when I'm having conversations with people. Is it's like, I find that, and this again, I am a silly person because sometimes I don't realize, but people are not always walking through going like, I'm doing life right, I'm the best. Like, even though sometimes those words are hollow in my head, I still say them all the time, just trying to get myself through. Like, I'm like, yeah, what's up? I'm rocking this. Like, and, you know, I feel good or bad. But then when I talk to people, I'm always excited. I'm always excited about every person that I talk to, because they're doing something that I'm not doing. And I just want to know what it's like and how it works. And then clearly if they're talking to me, I've only had a handful of people who have talked to me when they were having a low moment, and they tried to get out of it, and I wouldn't let them, because I was like, no, this is part of it. This is part of the whole thing. They're like, listen, you know, I'm having a real hard time. And I was like, let's discuss it. Let's get through it. You know what I mean? Because you're in a high point. I'm feeling great about it, and you're working hard, and it's going to be great. But like, even just discussing the trajectory of your career and the fact that you said like it kind of helps you give perspective. I hope that somebody else who could be listening to this, who is maybe at a different point in their career, could hear about the trajectory of yours and think, you know, maybe I don't have to feel like I'm not doing this thing that I want to do, because I can shift and focus on something else and get what I'm looking for out of the career. Because we're all trying to get different stuff. We all feel about our own work in different ways. Like, it's cool.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I love talking to you. I love talking to everybody. This has been so great. Thanks for listening to Yes But Why Podcast. Check out all our episodes on yesbutwhypodcast.com, or check out all the content on our network, HC Universal, at hcuniversalnetwork.com.